The next panel will be aligning research agendas with research recommendations. And we will kick this off with polling question number 4. We'd like to get your sense of this polling issue, that there's strong evidence base for respite care. Let us know if you strongly disagree, agree, or unsure. I see from this that I think many of us think we made there is some progress around having a strong evidence base for respite, but that we still have a lot of important work to do in advancing respite research. So I'm especially glad that we're all here at this summit today. We were really excited to discover that we're not alone in our commitment to building this evidence base for respite. My colleagues on this next panel have all developed approaches to expanding and encouraging respite research and related services, and that all of their work fully aligns with ARCH's goals. And so I'm especially pleased to introduce all of them today. Their full bios are available in your packets and online, so I will just briefly introduce them now. Bill Zagorski is here in his capacity as chair of the National Adult Day Services Association. He also served as the research committee chair for the association. And in his day job, he is the CEO of American Senior Care Centers in Tennessee. Dr. Emma Miller, Senior Research Fellow at the School of Social Work and Social Policy at the University of Strathclyde in Scotland. She also works closely with Shared Care Scotland, which in many ways is kind of our equivalent to ARCH in Scotland. They do some really amazing work, and we're really excited to have collaborated with them more in the last few years. And Dr. Kim Whitmore, who you all now know quite well from her last presentation, but I want to let you know that she's really become a critical advisor to ARCH in many capacities, including her work to promote international respite collaborations. And also with her public health background, she's become an essential advisor to us in COVID-19 and respite. So thank you all, and I will turn this right over to Bill for his presentation.
Thanks, Jill. I certainly appreciate having the opportunity to speak today, and thank you to Kim and Ray and everyone else that's already gone before. Ray, I think you took many of the words right out of my mouth, so I'll just kind of defer to the recording of what Ray talked about a lot with the challenges for ARCH's panel. But NASDA's research priorities really align very well with most of the panel's recommendations for future research, and certainly a lot more to come. Without trying to get into too many details, wanted to take a step back momentarily and really kind of look at what adult day services are. Next slide, please. Again, adult day services are a very, very highly variable service setting. And if we asked everyone on this the webinar today what adult day services are, we'd probably have 75 to 100 different answers with 90 different descriptions of different models and 80 different descriptions of who uses adult day services. So we talk about what adult day services are, and just trying to back up and try to create a comprehensive definition is a challenge. But in general, it can certainly be considered a coordinated and structured program of services for adults of all ages in a community-based setting. Adult day services in general are designed to provide either or both a social and often health-related set of services to adults in need in that supervised or assisted care setting outside of their residence. So certainly the delineation between a non-residential and non-institutional care setting in a professional environment. And historically, it is certainly concentrated on the care recipient, but also, adult day services certainly provides the respite for caregivers who otherwise have no break from that 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week, job of being a caregiver. So without getting too much into what adult day services are, next slide, please. NASDA really is the membership association representing adult day service centers across the United States. I couldn't tell you exactly the amount of members we have at the moment, but it is a significant portion of the adult day service sector represented across the United States. There are a number of state chapters. I serve as the president for the Tennessee Association of Adult Day Services, and a number of other entities have their own state entities of adult day service organizations. Some are also affiliated with Leading Age, and some are independent. So there's a number of state organizations that are members of the National Association as well. But in general, there are more than 6,000 or so registered adult day centers, if you will, across the United States, and another 3,000 to 4,000, it could be more or less, kind of the unregistered shadow market throughout the U.S. as well. And the number is I wouldn't say it's disputed, but that 6,000 number is more recent data from the CDC. NADSA itself has been the entity that compiles the data for the National Study of Long-Term Care Providers, so that number has fluctuated slightly over the past 2 years, but the 2020 frame is in process and nearly complete, but it'll have about 6,000 registered and roughly another 3,000 to 4,000 kind of in that shadow market that are operated either in rural areas in so many states that still operate, without a licensure or certification, or, with institutional settings having small adult day service locations. So that being said, really more than a decade ago, NADSA kind of set back and created a research committee to help align this, disparate data collection and research initiatives throughout the industry. There significant research has been compiled and has been ongoing for well more than a decade, and there's some other presenters later today who have been part of that research. The academic research entities, as well as certain providers in the industry, have been coalescing around each other for a long time. But NADSA formed the research committee to really push forward these kind of goals and objectives. Next slide, please. So we really kind of wanted to take a step back and say what NADSA did with this research committee, and talking more without going into too many details about who sits on that committee. But it's quite a few providers of adult day services, a number of academic research institutions, and primary investigators, policymakers, caregivers, but it's a pretty wide variety and background of who sits on that committee for assistance. In 2015, the committee did complete kind of this outcomes matrix that was rather unwieldy. It was about 20 pages of compiled information about what data is being collected across what states and what areas. And although was significant and helpful in the academic setting, from a adult day service setting itself and from a provider standpoint, it wasn't utilized very much because it just was too unwieldy. And we'll kind of talk more about that in a minute, just of what research is to adult day providers. So a group then continued that effort and was published by Keith Anderson and others in 2018 in the Journal of Applied Gerontology, standardizing uniform outcomes and measures in adult day services. And that really was the genesis of this next iteration of the research committee, who then came back together and compiled last year a comprehensive research statement and a 5-year plan for research priorities, and a domain map that was really kind of simplifying it even more to better align with what adult day service providers are seeing in the across the United States. Following that, we also put together, again, Ray took the words out of my mouth, put together a comprehensive annotated bibliography to compile much of the relevant research that has been been undertaken over the past 10 years, as well as notating some of the research that came before that too, and that's all posted on the website. That's available for download. I believe the 5-year statement and the domain map is part of the handout. But really just wanted to acknowledge that historically the research in adult day services has concentrated on the care recipient. However, that is really, you've really seen an evolution of it in the past 5 years or so, concentrating as much on the care recipient, but now also on the care receivers. And there's a number of studies that are ongoing, and NADSA has partnered with currently and in the future that concentrate just as much on the care recipients as they do on the caregivers themselves. So just kind of moving forward into what this research statement is. Next slide, please. And again, I didn't include the actual statement, but we did target the adult day services community, including all the stakeholders across the adult day community, including providers and academic partners and government institutions and policymakers, but came up with the, kind of the 5 domains that are very similar to where ARCH, the expert panel recommendations. But our domains we're standardizing the adult day outcomes and measures, and followed by the standardization and updates of the metrics and the data collection practices, more specific to the tools and the tools for using and collecting the data, followed by how to utilize the data for stakeholders across, translated into the translational research into innovative adult day service models, and then followed by the ongoing implementation and evaluation of research in the industry. So the methodological issues that were identified by the expert panel were very similar across the adult day service settings. The disparate data collection across multiple different service models were one of the main challenges to really look at what research is being done throughout the industry. So standardizing the outcomes was the start of the process in the 2018 JAG article, and certainly continues into this process now. And then we really concentrate then on the provider competence and translational research into best practices. So the research is certainly ongoing, and I wanted to talk just for a moment about some of the challenges and the takeaways. Next slide, please. So the standardization of adult day service models is probably the #1 challenge with even conducting research in the adult day service industry. And I think Ray said it took 6 months to come up with a definition of respite. We're about 2 years into that that search for what the global definition of adult day services is, and we might have a comprehensive definition in the next 2 years. So we're not there yet, because it is certainly a massive challenge with differential regulation and legislation and licensing and certification. But there is no national or international definition at the moment. The other big challenge really in adult day services is research participation, and it's not from a randomized controlled trial standpoint, but it's more along the lines of who is a researcher. And NASDA itself is a trade association representing providers, and we've been able to create the research committee to kind of translate this into research into best practices. My background is in academic research primarily, and then transitioning into a business environment, also being able to take an academic research standpoint, translate that into research priorities for providers and into data collection and analysis and best practices translation has been the biggest joy that we've really seen, because now it's how do you do research, and who is a researcher is one of the main driving factors in NASDA's research committee's actions and future goals, because we've been able to to teach and simplify and disseminate instructions on who is a researcher, and it's every small provider to large provider has been able to participate in that standard data collection process. There's multiple states and state associations in California, Tennessee, New York, Indiana, Florida, Iowa, who have some ongoing data collection practices and projects that are overseen and assisted from the national standpoint that we've been able to coordinate with and move forward. So there's certainly a lot more to come, and I don't want to take up any more time that will be needed from the other preventers too. But in general, the data is there. The data is beginning to tell the story, and it's not just the the high cost healthcare utilization, but the social determinants of health too. But they really show that adult day services is an effective intervention for participants and caregivers. So we'll let the data tell the story moving forward.
Thank you so much, Bill. I was delighted to have met Bill several years ago at a Tennessee Lifespan Respite Summit, where we immediately recognized that we were pursuing the same paths toward improved research in our respective areas. And there's certainly so much overlap between respite and adult day services. So thank you for sharing that. I'd now like to transition to Dr. Emma Miller. She's going to talk about the similar type of review of the literature in the United Kingdom that they've undertaken and how it's influencing their research work moving forward.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Jill, and thank you to the whole team who've organised the summit over today and tomorrow. It's a fantastic opportunity to get our heads together, I think, and compare our experiences and evolving knowledge across the pond. From what I've seen so far, from reading the background information, there are lots of similarities, but also some really interesting differences, and I think the opportunity to learn is fantastic. So I'm just going to run through some of the research we've been doing here in our little group, our parallel group over in the UK. So next slide, please. And just to tell you a little bit about that group, we're called the Short Breaks Research and Practice Development Group. We mainly are focused in Wales and Scotland within the UK, but we have other partners in England and Ireland too, and we're really keen to develop links more broadly than that. Our terms of reference were drafted in 2017. We've only been around for a few years. So the purpose to support a culture of research and build research capacity across the short break sector, with the aim of improving understanding of the role of short breaks and respite care, and to help structure future research in ways that will help support continuous improvement in both policy and practice. And Dawn Williamson at Shared Care Scotland, who Kim has already mentioned, has just recently put up a page on the Shared Care Scotland website which covers our group and includes the report which I'm going to be referring to on the research we've done reviewing evidence on respite and short breaks. So next page, please. Just a tiny bit more about the research group and who's in the group. So again, starting with Dawn at Shared Care Scotland, that's an organisation which aims to improve the quality and provision of short breaks in Scotland. And there's so much useful information on the website there, including information about creative opportunities, new opportunities in the context of COVID, and how to support carers to get some kind of break in these challenging circumstances. Then there's a lot of focus on outcomes in our research group. Diane Seddon in Wales has been working on outcomes there for a number of years. And I have to acknowledge to being a bit of an outcomes nerd and an obsessive about personal outcomes for people who use services and carers over a number of years. And we also have colleagues at the Open University in Scotland, primarily Joyce Cavey and Rosanna Ware. So next slide, please. Just a bit of a spoiler alert before I run through a few slides on some of the key findings from our scoping review of the literature, is that, as is often the case, the research tells us as much about the gaps as it does about the evidence. So just to cover a few key outcomes, we'll move on to the next slide, please. The scoping review was actually funded by Shared Care Scotland with the purpose of better understanding the research evidence about short breaks and respite for carers. We use the lens of carer outcomes as the lens for our research. We looked at published literature from 2000 onwards. The review itself was conducted at Bangor University, and our group acted as a reference group and review panel throughout that process. In the end, the review looked at 63 papers focusing on carers for older people. We were looking at different types of short breaks, looking for evidence for different types of short breaks. We found that most of the evidence tends to concentrate on the more traditional daycare services and residential respite care, as well as in-home respite. But with Dawn's focus around Shared Care Scotland, there's more of that focus on other options, other alternatives, different types of short breaks, and the evidence base is very, very limited in that area so far. Next slide, please. So starting with carer health and well-being, I think that we have often found, looking at outcomes for carers over the years, that carers themselves are often most concerned about their own health and well-being because of that concern about, if something happens to me, what happens to the person that I care for? And we found that this was the most prevalent outcome in the research. The evidence collectively, there was a fairly strong evidence base around, I think similar to the findings you've already talked about, improvements in carer emotional well-being, specific references to having a sense of freedom, to the benefits of peace of mind, and just a bit of relief from caring responsibilities, improved sense of resilience, opportunity to attend to self-care needs, and also this concept of retrospective necessity came up in the review. So to illustrate that, I've picked a comment from a carer from one of the articles, and this carer said, I initially found myself thinking, I'm the only person, the only one who can't do this, who can't get it right. But then I began to realise that actually I was normal. They, the day centre staff, helped me realise that it was normal to need a break. And after I accepted their offer, I could finally see that it works. And I think that comment is so common. It illustrates many carers' views about the difficulty of getting to the point of actually being able to acknowledge that they need a break. But once they do have that and experience the benefits of it, how they look back and wonder how that's the retrospective necessity. How did I manage before I got the breaks? So the research confirms positive health and wellbeing outcomes for carers and the individuals they support, and that those health and wellbeing outcomes need to be linked to personalised short breaks. That came up quite a lot in the literature review. So similar to what Kim was talking about around the 5 rights, really needing to understand that carer, that family situation, and the outcomes important to them as the basis for working out what's the right type of respite. Next slide, please. Of course, there's always a flip side, and some of the evidence was less clear-cut about improved health and well-being. So, for example, some research showing that short breaks deliver only positive physical but not positive emotional outcomes, while others conclude that any positive benefits accruing from a short break soon dissipate. I think, maybe need to look at some of these findings with caution in the context of all of the findings, but there are some questions there that we need to answer. Research confirming that some carers taking short breaks, and this reflects some of the discussion that's coming up in the chat box around feelings of guilt, anxiety, emptiness, loneliness, particularly when the short break takes the form of residential respite care, and also sometimes sadness at being separated. So this carer, for example, talking about the guilt. I didn't sleep that night, hardly any at all, and in the morning I got up and cancelled. So I think some of that stuff really points to the need to engage with carers, so the kind of backstage work that needs to go on to converse with carers, to build relationships, to build an understanding, and to have that reassurance. So negative effects are mitigated when carers are supported to accept their needs for a short break are legitimate, and that they're able to appreciate its preventative effects. So that old saying that we use a lot over here, you can't pour from an empty cup. You need to be well enough to be able to care. So next slide, please. Also, slightly different outcome focus about carers having a life of their own being really important. So, and this is a key policy priority across the countries in the United Kingdom about supporting carers to have a life of their own. Some of the key issues around opportunities for time away from the caring world to pursue personal interests, about being able to relate to others in ways not linked to the caring role, to have that temporary disconnect from caring to focus on other roles, for example, being a grandmother or a wife, and to reconnect with other family members and friends. There was also some evidence around short breaks affording opportunities for routine domestic chores and mundane tasks, including shopping, but these activities may not be as beneficial as doing things that could not otherwise be done. But I also know from my own experience as a social worker before working with carers that it's really not appropriate to question how someone chooses to use the time when they have a relative in respite care, because it may be that they absolutely have no choice other than to catch up on chores at that time. So I'll just move on to the next slide, please. Again, I think this came up already in some of the presentations about the importance of respite for maintaining positive caring relationships. and about how respite and short breaks can play a key role in supporting those positive caring relationships and enabling carers to continue with caring. But there's also something in there about enabling carers to positively frame the relationship with the supported person being improved through respite, and to think about their achievements as a carer as well, and the positive aspects of the role. Obviously, the nature and quality of the pre-existing relationship is important there, and there may be in some situations limits to how the benefits in terms of positive relationships. But gaps in understanding caring relationships are often reciprocal, and there's a need to consider outcomes within dyads or other caring relationships. And I think that all the presentations so far today have talked about the importance of looking at family outcomes, not just at one party, but the whole family. And I think that's absolutely critical to this agenda. Next slide, please. Important features of short breaks. What makes for a good short break? The quality of the break is so important, that the experience for the supported person, in particular the opportunity for safe and meaningful engagement, is critically important in determining outcomes. And I think this has also been coming up in the chat box already. So that short breaks have greater benefits when appraised by the carer as being a positive experience for the supported person. And I think it was Lisa, a carer, who spoke in the chat box about when the person they care for is so proud to be able to produce what they have made during their respite opportunity. And that's so important in terms of the guilt aspects. Duration of care, short breaks and respite also came up as a theme in the literature. So longer breaks can have a more positive effect for carers than shorter ones. And at a local level within Scotland, Dundee Carers Centre did some research a few years ago suggesting that a period of less than half a day, they wouldn't consider that to be a short break, that you need that slightly longer period of time to really just relax, I guess. But we need to know more about what are the features which are associated with the best outcomes. Next slide, please. So that's really a very quick canter through some of the key outcomes that we looked at in our scope and review of literature. There's much more than that in the report itself, but what we did in the review as well was to look at the priorities for future research and related developments, and those recommendations were really clustered around 3 key themes, which we used the concept of what matters for each of those 3 themes. So first of all, understanding what matters in terms of what are the needs of families from short breaks and respite, and really needing to engage with families to understand what is it they actually want to achieve, what would they like to happen, what would they like to maintain that's already working, but they need a break to maintain quality of life, for example. So we've had a huge amount of focus in our group and in the research over time to embed outcome-focused conversations, outcome-focused assessment as a key area of practice across services in both Wales and Scotland. So I've referenced a journal article there about some of the evidence around that. So that's the first part of it, but then there's the capturing what matters, so understanding the impact of respite and short breaks over time. And I think it's already come up that we perhaps have a sense of some of the proximal outcomes. What's the short-term effects of respite and short breaks? We have quite good evidence around that, but we really need to be focusing longer term, those distal outcomes. That's a key gap, I would say. Some key research that's coming up in Wales that Diane's leading on around cost benefits and social return on investment. Worth keeping an eye on that, as I think Diane's going to be talking about that actually in December in one of your webinars, Kim. And then, so we've got the what matters in terms of thinking forwards, working with families, what do you want to achieve from your breaks and your respite? We've got the looking backwards, what are the impacts of those short breaks and respite? But we also need to be engaging around commissioning, delivering and scaling up respite and short breaks provision to reflect what matters to carers. And I guess that's where there's another parallel between our agenda here in the UK and what you've been describing today. So I think that's probably enough from me just now, and pass over to Kim.
Thank you so much, Emma. I will now pass it to Kim, who's going to share with us her wonderful initiative around the break exchange.
Great, thank you so much. And Emma is an incredible partner in the break exchange, so it's a good segue. Really the model for the break exchange, which I'm going to share, builds off and helps support the work that Emma just presented on at a more international level. So if you could advance to the next slide, please, that would be great. So I want to just share a little bit about what is the break exchange, talk about the benefits of joining, share very, very briefly information about a global assessment that we conducted through the break exchange, as well as a survey that we did to better understand the respite services during COVID, and then share, most importantly, how to stay connected and get involved in the break exchange. Next slide, please. So the break exchange stands for Building Respite Evidence and Knowledge, and this is an international group of researchers, providers, agencies, and really just any individual who is committed to building a culture of evidence-based respite care. Next slide, please. The break exchange was founded with the following partners. The School of Nursing, ARCH, is a founding partner. Shared Care Scotland, of which Emma is connected with through the work that she just presented, and Don Williamson, who is on the one of the participants today, as well as the International Short Break Association. Next slide, please. So I can't mention the International Short Break Association, or ISBA, without putting in a plug for the international conference that we had hoped to host in Madison this past June, but because of the pandemic, deferred that to this coming June, and we are still now in the loomingness of the pandemic, looking at virtual options for that as well. But we hope that you all, if you aren't already, will take a look at the conference website and join us for the International Short Break Association conference. I've had the pleasure of attending the most recent ISBA conference that was in Iceland 2 years ago, and it is truly an incredible opportunity to learn about respite and what's working around the globe. And we are so excited to be able to host that here in the US, and hope that you will all join us and help promote the conference to others as well. Next slide. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about how the break exchange has been structured, but I wanna just first mention that truly the impetus for the foundation of the break exchange builds off from the expert panel recommendations. We really exist to help promote and encourage researchers around the globe to take these recommendations and put them into practice. So it is really the foundation of our work, and something that we frame a lot of what we do in the break exchange. So we have a real intentional focus on that as we move forward in growing and building the work of the break exchange. Next slide. There's several benefits of joining the break exchange, and I'm going to walk through each of those in the next couple slides. Next slide, please. The first is connecting. So we, again, have a global network of researchers, providers, agencies, and individuals. And currently we have more than 130 members from more than 13 countries that are part of the break exchange. So it really is an incredible network to get to know and learn from and with each other. Next slide. And with that learning comes opportunities to learn about evidence-based respite care practices and research that is happening around the world. So we share information in lots of different venues, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Next slide. Opportunities to share your work are a part of this, and so you can feature your work and learn about others' work in our monthly e-newsletter, on our break exchange website. We have multiple social media platforms, and we also host quarterly webinars, and so we invite you to share and present your work in those webinars and through our different outlets, as well as come and take part of those to learn about what others are doing around the world as well. Next slide. And then collaborate. This is, I think, one of the most unique features that we're really excited to have just been able to launch. We have the opportunity for you to create a member profile on our website, and that then feeds into a searchable member database. So if you are looking for someone to collaborate with on an evaluation or research project, this is a great way to go find someone, who's doing similar work or has similar research interests or works for a program that you're interested in getting connected with. So we really encourage you to take a look at our website, fill out your member profile, and search for potential collaborators through our online member database. Next slide. I want to just acknowledge some funding that we recently received from the Global Health Institute grant, and this allowed us to leverage and enhance the capacity of the Break Exchange. We actually did a sort of unfunded soft launch of the Break Exchange at the International Conference in Iceland almost 2 years ago. And with this Global Health Institute grant, we're really able to build more infrastructure, build out our website, add the member profile, develop more recruitment materials, and really help enhance the Break Exchange. So we are so happy to have that funding. As a part of that grant, we also were able to conduct 2 really important surveys. Next slide. The first being the COVID survey that we recently did. So looking at, in response to the pandemic, wondering how people were responding and reacting to the pandemic. We did a survey of our partners and pushed that out pretty broadly. We were grateful to have more than 200 responses from 15 different countries that completed that survey. And I'm not going to go into details of that in this presentation, but I would defer you to the recorded webinar that has the detailed results. And we're hoping to have a publication of this out soon in the near future for you as well. But we really focused our analysis around the key lessons that are listed here. So looking at key challenges that programs face, how they adapted. And then we were just amazed at all the new and innovative services that were created and the helpful resources that people shared. Next slide. So the implications from that, again, despite all the challenges that many organizations faced, we were impressed at how so many were able to adapt or create new services to continue to meet the needs of their caregivers. And it was neat to see how most organizations really prioritize supporting basic needs and mental health and shifted their sort of definition of respite care, where it wasn't feasible to provide direct physical care to care recipients. Respite agencies tried to offset other responsibilities of caregivers, providing groceries, doing errands, things like that, helping to do more care coordination that in turn offered a bit of respite to those caregivers as well. And we found that organizations that were most successful were the ones that were able to plan and adapt quickly and appeared to have good leadership and support. Next slide. And then I just want to briefly mention, again, I won't talk in detail about this, but if you haven't already seen this document, I was very honored to be able to be the lead author on these guidelines that were put out by ARCH on how to provide and receive respite care safely during the COVID-19 pandemic. So you can take a look at those guidelines. There's a recorded webinar that walks through them and lots of great downloadable resources for respite agencies and family caregivers alike to help understand how to make decisions around when it's safe to provide and receive respite care during the pandemic. Next slide. And then lastly, I just want to end, I'm a respite care researcher, and so I always like to remind folks that we all need respite. And so since we're in the Zoom technology world today and often face technology challenges, I thought this was a good slide to kind of showcase that, almost everything will work again if you unplug it for a few moments, even you. And so just a reminder to each of us in the chaos of the world around us, make sure that we're also practicing what we preach and enjoying respite when we need it as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you all for really wonderful presentations. It's such an honor to be able to think about future collaborations with all of you as we expand research around respite and short breaks globally. So thank you all for those great presentations. We do have a few minutes if you have any questions for any of our presenters. I'm not sure there are any in the chat box already. Have you seen any, Marcia?
No, I have not.
We'll give everyone a few seconds if you want to type any questions right now. We've had some requests for links to different things that presenters have mentioned, and we have posted those links in the chat box. A lot of discussion about the language we use around respite, whether we use short breaks or the word respite. That could be a whole separate summit in and of itself as well. Any other questions coming in? Sue Pesher would like to know if you can please show that last image again. About unplugging, I guess. There you go. And of course, you can find all of the PowerPoint presentations on the Respite Summit website as well, links to all the presentations. Some other important comments. Cassandra wants us to know that most crisis nurseries, which are emergency respite for caregivers of children, often take all siblings in the family.